Special thanks to Horizon Therapeutics for sponsoring the Special Fathers Network Dad to Dad podcast, working tirelessly to research, develop, and bring forward medicines for people living with rare and rheumatic diseases. Discover more about Horizon Therapeutics' mission at horizontherapeutics.com.
One of the things that I learned later is that when your child is diagnosed with a rare condition or really any kind of life-changing condition, is that as the parent, you kind of have to go through a grieving process for your kid not being the healthy kid.
Something that I discovered at Camp Sunshine was the parent groups, which was basically group therapy. They have a counselor there that's really good, and she runs these sessions. It's there that I learned how important community is.
Those are our two guests this week, Toby Brown and Jess Hohn, both fathers of kids who have Schwachman-Diamond Syndrome, or SDS, a rare genetic disorder. We'll hear their stories and how the two families have each done their best to navigate the world of special needs. That's all on this Special Fathers Network Dad to Dad podcast. Say hello now to host David Hirsch.
Hi, and thanks for listening to the Dad to Dad podcast, Fathers Mentoring Fathers of Children with Special Needs, presented by the Special Fathers Network.
The Special Fathers Network is a dad-to-dad mentoring program for fathers raising children with special needs. Through our personalized matching process, new fathers with special needs children connect with mentor fathers in a similar situation. It's a great way for dads to support dads. To find out more, go to 21stcenturydads.org.
And if you're a dad looking for help or would like to offer help, we'd be honored to have you join our closed Facebook group. Please go to facebook.com/groups and search Dad to Dad.
So let's hear this conversation now between David Hirsch, Toby Brown, and Jess Hohn.
So I'm thrilled to be talking today with Toby Brown of Colorado Springs and Jess Hohn of Littleton, Colorado, two dads who each have a child with Schwachman-Diamond Syndrome. Toby and Jess, thank you for taking the time to do a podcast interview for the Special Fathers Network.
Sure.
You're welcome.
Toby, you and your wife, Angela Bird, have been married for 15 years and are the proud parents of two children, Kavan, 20, and Annabelle, 18. Jess, you and your wife, Felima, who's a preschool teacher, have been married for 23 years and are the proud parents of three children, Ethan, 21, Arianna, 18, and Sadie, 14. Between the 5 children that you each have, 4 of them, excluding Annabelle, have Schwachman-Diamond Syndrome, or SDS, a rare genetic disorder that affects many parts of the body, particularly the bone marrow, pancreas, and skeletal system. Toby, let's start with some background. Where did you grow up? Tell me something about your family.
So I grew up in Topeka, Kansas. I have 2 brothers. I'm the middle child, and my parents divorced when I was 7.
Okay. And from what I remember, you actually had an older brother as well.
Yes. My brother Joey died when I was in middle school. So when I talk about my brothers, I don't typically mention him because he was several years older than me. But yes.
Okay. Well, I remember in a prior conversation that seemed very tragic that you lost your older brother at such a young age. Not only your young age, but his relatively young age as well.
Yes. It was a life moment.
I can only imagine. So out of curiosity, what did your dad do for a living?
My dad became an archivist for the Kansas State Historical Society when I was about 8, I think. Most of my childhood that I can remember, that was his job.
Okay. And how would you characterize your relationship with your dad?
Distant, I guess. Because of the divorce, my mom had custody and my dad had visitation. And so I was able to do things with my dad. Like we saw, he had his visitation was 1 night a week and every other weekend and 2 weeks during the summer. But he did Boy Scouts with me. And so I had a lot of interaction with him through that. But our relationship was not a particularly strong one, in that sometimes the time that we had was not specifically like interacting with each other, but just being in the same space.
So more physically separated or distant, that's what I heard you saying.
Sure, that's a good description, yes.
And were there an important takeaway or lesson that you think about when you think about your dad?
So one of the things that I learned from my dad's examples was to admit when you don't know something. It can be fun to make up an answer, but you should tell people that it's a made up answer. I feel like my dad taught me some things, but that I also learned a lot of things from his examples rather than him actually like trying to teach me stuff. So.
Okay. Well, there is something to be said by learning by example. And I'm thinking about your dad's career as an archivist, right, for the Kansas State Historical Society, which, you're looking for facts, right? Authenticity, right? It has to be accurate, right? So it sort of goes along with what you were saying. So I'm thinking about father figures, and I'm wondering what, if any, role your grandfathers played, first on your dad's side and then on your mom's side.
So again, because of that distance, I didn't have a whole lot of time with my grandparents. My dad's side, Grandpa Brown was always more active. And so he taught me how to drive the riding lawnmower, taught me that, you can answer things without using words. There was one time when we were going on a hike through some woods, and my brothers and I were gung-ho and in the front, and whoever was in front hit a spider web, just walked straight into it and freaked out and jumped to the back of the line. And the next kid hit a spider web and freaked out and jumped to the back of the line. My grandpa moved to the front of the line and just was walking and came to a spot and stopped and turned around and started telling this story and waving his hand all around and waving his hand right in a spider web, just totally knocking it out and wrapping it around his hand, and finished his story and walked on. So yeah, that's one of my favorite stories about Grandpa Brown. Grandpa Sells, again, I didn't have a whole lot of interaction with him. I saw him basically once a year at Christmas, and he was always just the old guy that carved the turkey. So,
okay. Well, a note to you, dads who are grandpas out there: don't be the guy that's just known for carving the turkey.
Yes. Yeah.
Okay. Well, let's switch gears. Jess, let's talk about some background. Where did you grow up? Tell me something about your family.
Well, I grew up in Littleton, Colorado. My parents actually still live in the same house I grew up in. Both my parents were special ed teachers. We would do summer trips every year. We would do lots of road trips. We were all around the country traveling like that.
Do you have some siblings?
Yes. Yeah, I'm the youngest of three. I have an older brother and an older sister.
And are they all there in Littleton or nearby or not?
My brother is in Denver, so he's fairly close. My sister is in Missouri, Springfield, Missouri, which is a lot closer to a lot of my dad's family who live in St. Louis, where he grew up.
Gotcha. You mentioned that both your parents were special ed teachers. So I'm wondering, when you think about your dad, how would you characterize your relationship with him?
Well, he and I have a great relationship. I see him almost every week, at least. Just last night, I go over and I play cribbage with them, and on Thursdays, he runs a local cribbage club, and then he does a less formal cribbage club, my mom and me and their neighbor, and we have a good time doing that. He's someone that I look up to. As a major role model in my life. I aspire to be the kind of father that he has been.
Yeah, well, thanks for sharing. Sort of coincidentally, I've had the chance to meet your parents, and your dad seems quite active.
Oh, yeah.
At his age, and like an endurance bicycler. And I'm wondering if that is something he passed down to you and your siblings as well.
Bicycling, no. That was him. I mean, when I was growing up, I would go on bike rides with friends and things like that. Maybe a little bit more so because he was bicycling, because he was doing the Ride the Rockies every year, which is this multi-day long bike ride through the Rocky Mountains. And he was doing that every year. He hasn't done it in a number of years, but that's not because he wasn't fit for it. It's because my nephew has a birthday that falls in at a time right when he would be training for it. And so he puts more value into his nephew's birthday. I believe there are a few other reasons, but I think that's one of the main reasons. But he's certainly being active and playing like sports, getting out. I think he's passed that on. He loved to play volleyball, and he played it for as long as he could. He had a few injuries. He tore his ACL and he tore his Achilles tendon, not at the same time, but years apart. But both while playing volleyball, and so eventually he had to stop doing that. But my brother is still playing volleyball fairly often. He was my soccer coach and my baseball coach, and I still play soccer. He comes to as many games as he can to watch. He and my mom are at most of the games there to watch. So.
Yeah, well, thanks for sharing. My takeaway is that he was very present.
Yes.
In a lot of different ways. And grandfathers, did either of your grandfathers play a role in your life as you were growing up?
Yes, my mom's parents, she is an only child, so her parents were around quite a bit, and my grandfather was there. He was a World War II veteran. He was a pilot for one of the bomber planes. Unfortunately, I can't remember the type of plane, but it was a bomber of some kind. And he would tell some number of stories about the war. And I think a lot of the stories that I can remember about the war were stories that he heard, like third party stories. But I do remember one story where he got my mom into a plane back home, obviously, and he got my mom into a plane. He was going to take her out flying. And he had to get the chocks out from under the wheel so it could roll. And she was in the cockpit, and something happened. I think she hit something, and the plane started rolling while he was out of the cockpit. And he had to grab onto the wing and hold the flap down, or something like that, so that it would just go in this long, big circle. And he slowly worked his way up the wing so that he could get into the cockpit to stop the plane from rolling.
I have this visual image. It's like a Laurel and Hardy type of situation.
Yeah. Well, he was also a farmer, and another story he would tell was that my grandmother was big into knitting and crocheting and lots of crafts like that. And she knitted him a scarf one time, but she didn't know when to stop. And so it became a very, very long scarf. And he would wrap it around his neck several times. And he was out on the tractor, and I guess one end was dragging out a little bit. It got unwrapped, and it wrapped around the axle of the tractor. And he had to work it all the way back around his neck to make sure that he said that jokingly that she was trying to kill him with that one, with that scarf.
Yeah, well, both those stories have very vivid images that come to mind. So that was your maternal grandfather. How about your dad's dad?
I didn't know him all that well. He was a chemist with a Skull and Steel, and he got Parkinson's disease, and so he passed away when I was, I want to say 7, 8, 9, somewhere around there. And by the time as far back as my memories go, he'd already lost the majority of his speech. He would mumble a little bit, and so I didn't even really remember his voice at all. I was so young, I really didn't understand very much of what was going on with him. He would shuffle along. I remember this one time, my cousin and I, we would go up there to St. Louis, where they lived, for Christmas every year. And my cousin, who also lived in St. Louis, he'd come over to my grandmother's house where we would stay, or my grandmother and grandfather's house at that time, where we would stay. And so they would come and visit while we were there. And he and I were just these young kids. He's probably a couple years younger than me, and I couldn't have been more than 5. And we somehow got a flashlight, and we were like, let's go explore the basement. Yeah, we'll go explore the basement. And so we were at the basement door with the flashlight ready to go. And I remember seeing my grandfather at the end of the hallway, just kind of shuffling down the hallway towards us. And all he did, he didn't really say anything to us, and we didn't understand that he couldn't really. But he took the flashlight away from us and just left. And so we kind of thought of him as a mean old man. In knowing now, looking back on it with the eyes of a father, I guess, he needed to stop us from going into the basement where we would get into trouble probably. And so the best thing he could do was take away the tool we had to explore.
There you go. Well, sorry to hear that he died
Yeah.
Somewhat prematurely if it was Parkinson's disease. My dad actually had Parkinson's for a number of years before he passed away a handful of years ago. And it's very debilitating, right? You lose your ability to sort of balance and walk and, then communicate. So I appreciate you sharing that. So my recollection was that you both attended Cornell College in Mount Vernon, Iowa. And Jess, you've worked as a tech support analyst for a couple dozen years at Software AG. And I'm sort of curious to know, Toby, where did your career take you after college?
So after college, well, first point of clarification, Jess spent a year at Cornell.
Yeah.
And then transferred.
He attended Cornell.
Yeah.
And the funny thing about it is Toby went to Cornell the year after me.
Yeah. So
right.
We were this close to meeting each other then, but didn't happen.
But Toby's wife, Angela, was there while I was there, but we never met.
Mm-hmm. Which is incredible because the school is so small that you meet everybody.
Right.
So after college, Angela and I were together at that point, but not married yet. But we had kids before we got married. And so basically after college, I became a stay-at-home dad. And so I did that for a very long time, occasionally picking up a part-time weekend type job, did a little bit of sales in there. But my primary focus was on the kids in the house and doing things to make the family run, bills and, all of that other stuff that needs to happen in life. And then in 2007, she had a job change and we moved and we joined a new church and I started volunteering with the church. And then that eventually I was volunteering enough that they said, hey, we should give Toby a job. And so for a while there, they were paying me to work at the church. And then the church closed. I am now working part-time at a school district. I'm working in a high school kitchen.
Excellent. Well, thanks for the brief recap. And the highlight, at least from my perspective, is that you were more of a hands-on stay-at-home dad for a good part of your children's growing up.
Yes. Yeah.
There's millions of dads that are stay-at-home dads, but it's still the exception, not the rule. So it's looking back on it, it's really a privilege.
It is.
Right, to be able to spend all that time with your kids at such a formative age. So I have a lot of respect for that. Thank you for sharing. So let's switch gears and talk about special needs. Toby, I'm sort of curious to know, before Kavan's diagnosis, did you or Angela have any exposure to the special needs community?
Not specifically. We were both like mid-20s, 25 when Kavan was born and 26 when he was diagnosed. And I did not have, aside from, just being aware of people with special needs in the community or in school, I did not have any. I guess the one exception to that is I had a friend with diabetes growing up, and he's still one of my good friends. And so that friend with diabetes would be my connection to the special needs community, I think, prior to Kavan. Because obviously once that happens, you have a whole lot of connection.
So, your world opens up.
Yes, right? Yes.
So Jess, I know that both your parents were special ed teachers, so obviously you had some exposure to special needs from, your parents' occupational perspective. Mm-hmm. And I'm wondering how the SDS diagnosis came about for your three children.
Well, it started with Arianna, our middle child. She, between the 12-month and 15-month checkups, well, we went in for the 15-month checkup and found that she had not grown at all since the 12-month checkup. So in the last 3 months, she hadn't gained any weight. That's a big red flag to the doctor. And he decided that he would run every test he could think of to figure out what's going on. And so he ran every test he could and, sent us home because we had to wait for the results and everything. And he called us the next day at home and he said, okay, well, all the tests came back normal except for one. And that was the CBC, the blood count. And he said, on the CBC, there is this number called the absolute neutrophil count, or the ANC. And he said, normally, a normal ANC is 1,500. Anything below 1,000 is considered to be something called neutropenia. So he said anything below 500 is severe neutropenia, and the neutrophil, which this number is counting, is a white blood cell that fights off bacterial and fungal infections. And so when you get into neutropenia and the severe neutropenia, the body has a proclivity to it's susceptible. That's the word I'm looking for. So it's susceptible to getting infections and dangerous infections. You can go septic very quickly if it gets into the bloodstream. And so they came back to us. He came and he explained those normal numbers, and he said Arianna's number was 69. Mm-hmm. And so basically zero from where the normal is 1,500. And he said, I've called and made an appointment for you already for a hematologist. And he said, your appointment is tomorrow at this office. This is where you're going. I mean, it was all set up. And I mean, that was just amazing to already have the appointment, because specialists, knowing now, specialists are not the easiest to get appointments with, especially quick appointments. You have to wait for their openings, and he found an appointment for the next day for us. So he sent us in there, and he gave us a big warning ahead of time. He said, the thing to know about hematologists is that almost all of them, if not all of them, are dual specialists. They are oncologists and hematologists. He specifically said, you're going for the hematology side, not the oncology side. So don't be scared when you get there and you see that sign. So he explained that. But yeah, we went there, and we were going. I'm trying to remember. So I want to say that we went every day, I think, at first for a while, and they would do a blood draw every day, I think, for a week, and each day it was like 100 more. So like the next day it was around 150, and then the day after that it was around 200, in the 200 range somewhere, and then the next day it was around the 300 range, and it kept doing that until it got into the 600 range, and then the next time we went in it would drop back down. That was just something I noticed. The doctors weren't really pointing it out. I was just trying to. I have kind of an analytical brain, and so I'm constantly trying to find patterns and things, and that's the pattern that I just kept seeing with her blood draws. But it really kicked off a very long process for us, a diagnostic process. The hematologist was telling us that in all likelihood, it's what they call benign neutropenia of childhood, which it can get kicked off by other illnesses, something like that, where a child has neutropenia, and it has a number of different causes for it. And so most likely it was going to resolve itself in about 3 months or something like that. And so we would wait 3 months, do regular blood draws. And if it lasts longer than that, then we'll figure out, what's going to happen at that point. But neutropenia itself is a symptom. It's not a diagnosis. If it's benign neutropenia of childhood, that's one thing. But beyond that, once we knew it wasn't benign neutropenia of childhood, it's a symptom. It's not a diagnosis. And so they started referring us to every specialist they could think of. We went to a bunch of them. There was one that was just across the hall from them for GI, a GI doctor. We went to him. He was actually the first doctor to mention Schwachman-Diamond Syndrome to us. And he told us that he had a strong feeling that we could be falling into that diagnosis. But the problem was that he was actually retiring a month or two after that. He handed us off to a different GI doctor. But we were way too early in the process to get that diagnosis or know what. I know what it was. He thought strongly about that it was Schwachman-Diamond Syndrome, and I think he ordered a genetic test to be done because there is a known gene mutation for Schwachman-Diamond Syndrome, and he had that done, and Arianna came back and did not have that gene mutation. So we moved on and to try to find other diagnoses from other doctors and other specialists. There's too many to list. I can't. Let's see. were neurologists and immunologists, and I mean, it was just specialist after specialist after specialist, and it eventually came down to a process of elimination, and we were eventually diagnosed. She was eventually diagnosed with having Schwachman-Diamond Syndrome clinically, just through symptoms. Because SDS is so rare, they're not fully certain on all the genetic aspects of it. So the one mutation that they found, or it's not one mutation, they found several mutations on the one gene, but that one gene may not be the only one that's involved. And so my 3 kids are not genetically confirmed, but we've been clinically diagnosed. And there's a handful of other families in the SDS community that are clinically diagnosed as well. Every now and then we get doctors that will still come to us and start us on another diagnostic process again, going, well, hey, we don't know if it's DS, so let's check and go through this process again and see if we can find anything else. Because we don't have that genetic confirmation, it's just one more kind of stressor for us, I guess, to where we don't have it's something solid to lean on. We believe it's SDS. For a while they called us SDS-like, but they kind of they dropped that terminology, and now they just call us SDS clinical.
So how old would Arianna have been sort of when this symptomatic diagnosis was confirmed or took place?
I think it would have been right around her 2nd birthday.
Okay.
Yeah, so it was about close to a year of going through the specialists until we got that clinical diagnosis, and that was from people in Cincinnati. At the time, one of the leading hematologists that specialized in SDS was at Cincinnati Children's, and we took a few trips out there, and he told us that everything that he saw pointed right at SDS, and that he had no question in his mind that she had SDS, has SDS.
Well, thanks for sharing. So Arianna, even though she's number 2, was diagnosed first. And I'm wondering, how did Ethan's diagnosis come about, or how did you even think to get him tested for SDS?
Well, with the neutropenia, when we were going through the specialists in that first year, after we found out with Arianna, they wanted to go back and see if we had missed something with Ethan. And they did weekly blood draws on him. So every week we would go back and we would have blood draws done for him. And we did that for 6 weeks. And 3 of the blood draws came back in the mild neutropenic range, which is between 500 and 1,000. And so half of them were mild neutropenia, and the other half were normal, in the normal range, the low side of normal. And to my wife and I, we were going, that seems significant, but the doctor that was doing it didn't think so. And so they thought, well, that's probably just because he was sick. Yeah, it's fine. And they moved on and didn't really look back to Ethan again. And so my wife and I, we kept that in the back of our mind, but he was doing okay. And then let's see, our youngest was born, Sadie was born in 2008, and we knew to watch right from the beginning with her. And we had to wait a month after she was born, I believe. I think that's how long we had to wait before she had her own blood in her system. Up until then, it was still the mother's blood going through her system, and so once it was her own blood, they could do the CBC, and they found that she was 0. She was consistently much more severe with neutropenia than Arianna had been, and so she was diagnosed right away, a month in, and Ethan still at that point had not been diagnosed. It was 2012, 2013, somewhere right around there. I think it was 2012. He got sick at the very end of December of 2011 with the flu, and we found out that he had both types of the flu that season, the A and B. And then January rolls around and he gets this cough, And the cough was just a series of coughs that it was about 20 coughs in a row, and he couldn't stop. And then half an hour later it would happen again, and it was just happening throughout the day. And it was happening every day, all the time. And we took him to some doctors, and they were trying to figure that out. Eventually, they helped him to get it down to just a single cough that was really loud, really high pitched, and very painful to his chest. And that cough was happening every few minutes. He wasn't going to school. They would bring him homework at home, but they weren't giving him a whole lot of help. And he was very affected emotionally. I think that it was just, he was kind of losing the interaction at school. He wasn't getting the interaction with friends. He was just at home coughing in pain, and no one could tell him what it was. All the doctors we were going to started talking about it being psychosomatic. And we were going, well, even if it is, that's not helping us to stop it, and they're like, well, he has to want to stop it, or something along those lines. And it just wasn't helpful.
How old would he have been at that time?
He was born in 2000, so he would have been 11. And the cough lasted from that January, and the last time he coughed was the day before Mother's Day. So Felima, my wife, said that it was her Mother's Day gift that he stopped coughing. But it was 5 months of coughing, and his chest hurt. It hurt for years after that. He was having chest pains. He had to stop playing soccer because it was too painful for running around. We saw some asthma specialists about some of that. And so that was kind of the beginning of it. And then right around his birthday of that year in September, the week leading up to his birthday, he was having migraines. And the migraines were happening at the same time every day. And it was very odd. His school happened to be right across from my work. I would pick him up from school and bring him across to my work, and then I would find a dark room and just put him in there. That was a little odd, but it was 3 or 4 days in a row. And then his birthday came over a weekend, and we had a paintball game planned with a bunch of friends, and we went to that, and it was a lot of fun. And I'm trying to think. I think Toby might have been at that. But anyway, we got to the end of it, and I was driving his friends home, and the migraine started up right on schedule. And we decided that was enough. So we took him to the ER. And at the ER, we told him, he's been having these migraines every day. And so we took him into the ER, and they treated him for migraine, which was give him fluids. They gave him a little bit of a sedative so he could sleep through it. And then they turned the lights off and left him in a dark room for a while. And that was perfectly fine. That's the way it's supposed to go. When he woke up, he had developed a 104-degree fever. And when we got in there, it was normal. His temp was normal. After everything that had happened with the cough and the asthma specialist and everything we were going through, like I said, we had kept that in the back of our head about those half of the blood draws that came back abnormal. And so we had decided that it was time to start doing blood draws, regular blood draws for him. And we had the doctors give us a standing order at the lab so that we could do that. And so this was the first time since we had decided we would start doing that again that a fever had developed. And so we decided we would go with the typical protocol for fever, which with neutropenia, there's a protocol you follow, which is if it's over 100.4, 100.5, then you do a CBC, a blood culture. If the CBC comes back as being neutropenic, then you give a broad spectrum antibiotic. And so we decided let's go forward with that plan. And so we had him take a CBC and a blood culture. And then they came back. They showed me the CBC, and I don't think he was neutropenic. I don't recall if he was neutropenic. I think his ANC actually may have been severely elevated, like significantly elevated, which it was showing that it was actually fighting something. But when they showed that to me, I noticed that they had the doctor's name wrong, the pediatrician's name wrong. He had the same last name, but the wrong first name. And I said, that's not our doctor. Our doctor's this other doctor. And they're like, oh yeah, I'll go correct that. They're saying, we're not seeing anything wrong with as far as the CBC, so we're just going to send you guys home. And they sent us home with 104-degree fever that developed while we were in the ER. Oh, so we went home, and our pediatrician is an amazing doctor. I mean, he has been since the beginning. We lucked out with the pediatrician we got. He was at the hospital the next day doing his typical rounds, and he opened up the computer system and looked in there, and he recognized our last name because of our two girls. We were in there all the time, so he knew us very well. And he saw our last name, and he's like, well, I didn't know they were at the ER. And he's looking, he's like, oh, it's Ethan. Okay, well, what's this? Oh, blood culture that came back positive. He's like, and he looked at it, and he's like, well, no, that can't be right. That doesn't happen. He's like, that's a contaminant in the blood culture. We need to redraw the blood culture. And so he called us up, and he said, okay, well, I was looking, they had the wrong, they didn't notify, he found that they still kept it under the wrong name, the wrong pediatrician name. That's why he didn't know about it. And so he corrected that, because I imagine that happens a lot to him because it's the same last name. And he corrected that, and then he called us up and told us, you need to come in today to repeat this blood culture. And he, asking us what's going on and everything. And so we went in, repeated the blood culture, and it came back exactly the same. And the result that it came back with was, it took a day to grow, but so we knew this the next day even. But the result that it came back with was something called bacteremia. And bacteremia, as we understand it, is something that you do not see in kids over the age of 1. It's a very dangerous infection. And that alone was what decided it for him, that this is something that kids with normal immune systems don't get. And he got it. And so that decided that, okay, whatever our two girls have, he has it too. And so he was the last to be diagnosed with that. It was also the final straw for our pediatrician, and he does not send anyone to that ER ever anymore, because it could have been deadly if he hadn't caught them sending it to the wrong doctor, them sending a patient that developed a fever while in the ER home. He should have been checked, admitted to the hospital, and monitored, and it was a very dangerous thing. And he let them know that, and he doesn't send any of his patients there anymore.
Yeah, well, thanks for sharing. What a harrowing story.
Yeah.
And thanks for going into some detail, explaining that Arianna was the first, and then Sadie, and then Ethan, right?
Right.
Sort of out of birth order. And what a journey that you and Felima have been on. And Toby, I'm wondering what your experience has been as far as the diagnosis for Kavan.
So with Kavan, Schwachman-Diamond Syndrome is not the only issue that he has. He was born with birth defects and ended up in surgery at 24 hours old. And so he had specialists and a very aware pediatrician from the beginning. Schwachman-Diamond did not start to enter the picture until he was about 1, when he fell off his growth curve. So basically he had been tracking at his percentile, which was a low percentile, but at about 1, it flattened out, which it's not supposed to do. And so the pediatrician decided to start investigating that. And we did a whole lot of testing. I think we did the cystic fibrosis test 3 times, which is not a fun test to have to do once. But we did that multiple times. And eventually we saw specialists, hematologist, GI. And I think it was the hematologist who said, this looks an awful lot like Schwachman-Diamond syndrome. And so because of the neutropenia, Kavan also has the pancreatic insufficiency, which was the GI factor. And so between those two doctors talking to the pediatrician, he was clinically diagnosed. And then, as Jess had said, the genetic test was available. And so Kavan was able to do that test and was genetically confirmed. And so he does not have the same uncertainty factor that Jess's kids have to deal with, which is, I don't know. It's in some ways it's neither here nor there, but in other ways it makes a huge difference. Like the short version is fell off his growth curve, bunch of tests, Schwachman-Diamond. So.
Okay, well, thanks for sharing. It sounds a little bit easier, not easy as in, easy peasy, but, the time from some initial curiosity to the time of diagnosis was less circuitous than what Jess was describing.
Yeah. I think the diagnostic process for Kavan might have been 6 months.
Okay.
Between when the doctor became concerned about the falling off the growth curve to the genetic confirmation or even the clinical diagnosis, just because of, you take one test to eliminate something and then you have to figure out what to test next. And so it was still several months of what's going on, not nearly as harrowing as Ethan's story, but.
Yeah, well, thanks for mentioning. I think what I heard you say was that it's sort of like a process of elimination, one test. Mm-hmm. And you either learn something or don't learn something, and you have to pivot or go from there. Mm-hmm. So I'm sort of curious to know if there was some meaningful advice, Toby, that you and your wife got early on after the diagnosis that helped put the situation into perspective.
I don't recall anything earth-shattering. I remember a lot of doubt, particularly from other people outside of the family, or even grandparents on my wife's side, because Kavan appeared healthy. Mm-hmm. Schwachman-Diamond is not something that has an externally physical identifier, and so that was at times very frustrating, where we would tell people Kavan's sick, he needs to have this happen, and they would just be like, Kavan's a totally normal kid, what are you talking about? And so there was that conflict, I guess, that came up at times. And so I think that one of the things that I learned later is that when your child is diagnosed with a rare condition, or really any kind of life-changing condition, is that as the parent, you kind of have to go through a grieving process for your kid not being the healthy kid that everybody just anticipates having. Because when you find out you're pregnant, right, you're just like, yay, a baby's coming, and you assume everything's going to be, sunshine and roses, without any thorns, and then you find out, this kid's got some really big thorns. And so there's that process of getting to the point of accepting where you're at and what that means for your life as well as for your child's life. And so I think that was one of the bigger things that I learned, but that didn't happen anytime near diagnosis, unfortunately. But several years later. So,
well, it's a process, and the way I've heard it described is that moms and dads don't always arrive at the same time because we all process things differently. Mm-hmm. And it sounds like there was some outside pressure, like you were saying, from either family members or people beyond, because they didn't have all the information that you had, and they're just making an observation, right? Just like a physical observation, which obviously, is very limited, right? What we can see. Mm-hmm. So thanks for being so authentic and transparent about that.
We'll be back with more of the conversation on the Special Fathers Network Dad to Dad podcast in just a few moments. But first, this quick message. Please help 21st century dads gather research on families raising children with special needs by having them complete the Special Fathers Network Early Intervention Parents Survey. A link to the survey can be found in the show notes. As a token of our appreciation, each person, mom or dad, who completes the survey will receive a Great Dad coin. Thank you. Now, back to the conversation between David Hirsch, Toby Brown, and Jess Hohn.
Toby, I'm wondering what impact Kavan's situation has had on his younger sister, Annabelle, or your marriage, for that matter.
That is a great question. So I think that in terms of my marriage, it's been, I don't know, if anything, like I know that the additional stress and strain of having to deal with the medical stuff, the insurance and the doctors and the uncertainty of, just keeping the kids safe in light of increased risk can be very strenuous on a relationship, on a marriage. Fortunately, Angela and I have been able to stay on the same page about things, and I listen to her mommy intuition and she listens to my daddy intuition, and together we have been able to face challenges and do it well. Like there was one doctor that we had who she could not communicate with. And so we learned very early on that I had to be there at those doctor's appointments so that I could translate between the doctor and Angela so that the good communication happened. I think it's one of those things that you kind of have to grow into and figure out, be open communication and just making sure that you're on the same page and understanding things together, and that you have the same understanding of things. Because a lot of the strenuousness comes from that difference in understanding, I think. And so I think it's very important that both parents understand the special needs in the same way.
Yeah, well, thanks for emphasizing that. It sounds like at some level it has to do with communication.
I think so.
Open lines of communication, making sure that it's not just the words, but there's an understanding, and trying to be more diligent about that than maybe people would be otherwise, just because of all the things that are going on and the time it takes to do that.
Yep. Can I go back to Annabelle for a minute?
Oh, absolutely. Please.
All right. So you did ask about Annabelle too. And Annabelle as a sibling has grown a lot. Like one of your earlier questions to me was about, your exposure to special needs community. And Annabelle's been exposed since she was, 2, right? And so, or even 1.
She doesn't know any different, really. Yeah.
Yeah, she doesn't know any different. And so her compassion, I think, has been heightened. Her compassion and empathy. She's a very compassionate child and a very compassionate young adult. Very empathetic, to the point where it's gotten her into trouble sometimes. So I think that she's very aware of just the diversity of things, and aware, because she's had to defend Kavan or explain why Kavan's different to some of her friends or even to some of his friends. Like, I think that it's part of who she is, and part of her personality.
Well, thanks for sharing. It's not uncommon, but younger siblings of those that have special needs have a different upbringing, right? Because, like you said, she doesn't really know anything different, right? This is just her older brother, and this is who he is, and she's just sort of live with that from the get-go, and I'm thrilled to hear that it's led to a more compassionate and empathetic experience. And, sometimes that leads to like a different career altogether, right? Just because of that life's experience. So I'm thinking about supporting organizations, and I'm wondering, Jess, if there's an organization or two that you can identify that's made a difference for your family or for one or more of the kids, for that matter, as it relates to SDS.
Absolutely. Let's see. I think first of all would be Camp Sunshine. Camp Sunshine is this camp in Maine that they have themed weeks and weekends. I think they do some weekend programs, but they have themed weeks where they're for families with kids with life-threatening issues. And let's see, the first time we went there was in 2007. It was the summer of 2007, and we went to the theme for that week was hematology. And so we were one of 3, maybe 4 families with SDS. And then there were some others there with diamond blackfan anemia, some with Fanconi's anemia. I think about half of the families were there for sickle cell anemia. This place, it's you stay on site. They feed you. The hematology weeks are basically just a lot of relaxation, a lot of fun. They also had something that I discovered at Camp Sunshine was the parent groups, which was basically group therapy. They have a counselor there that's really good, therapist, and social worker. She does a great job, and she runs these sessions. And it's there that I learned how important community is. And I also learned that year that these families aren't necessarily dealing with the same syndrome, but they go through such similar paths. They talk about how difficult it was to get a certain diagnoses, or they talk about some of the struggles they have with getting in to see specialists or things like that. So it sounded so similar, and it was very valuable for me to see that. And that the parent sessions were actually the most valuable part of that first week that we went there.
Yeah, well, thanks for sharing with me. And it's not lost on me that you mentioned Camp Sunshine is in Maine.
Yes.
As in like far northeast, right? Not like in your backyard there in Colorado.
Right.
So I'm sort of curious to know, how is it that, Camp Sunshine even showed up on the radar screen, either for you or for Toby for that matter?
I believe that it was mentioned in the SDS an email group, a listserv group that my wife was part of, and Angela was part of as well. And there are people all over the country, and some even international. And so there were people that were more on the East Coast that knew about it, and they told us about it. In 2008, we went back to Camp Sunshine again, and that week was actually specifically Schwachman-Diamond Syndrome week. We flew into to Portland, Maine's airport, and we landed, and they came and picked us up in a van for Camp Sunshine. Yeah. And they loaded our stuff on, and they said, "Oh, we're going to go pick up your friends here." And they figured that we knew Toby and Angela already, but we didn't. We had never met them, but they had flown in from Colorado Springs, I think on a different flight, but we landed at similar times, and that's where we met Toby and Angela, is right there. Despite the fact that Angela and I went to the same college for a year, a small college with only about 1,000 students. Toby came the year after I left, but I mean,
you have to tell them how old Sadie was in 2008.
Oh yeah, she was a month old when we went there.
Oh my gosh! So Toby, can you corroborate that story?
I can correct that story. So we heard about Camp Sunshine through the Shwachman-Diamond Syndrome Foundation.
Okay.
Because they had been in the habit of having an annual conference, or every other year conference,
yes,
where families could get together. And that had been moving around the country. But then the foundation heard about Camp Sunshine, and Camp Sunshine basically became the host or the location for the foundation's conference. In 2008 was the first year that the foundation actually had their conference at Camp Sunshine. And so that's how we heard about Camp Sunshine, was through the foundation, which again, Jess was saying had a huge online presence and still does. And so there's a Facebook group, and I think that the email list has pretty much gone away with the advent of social media, but the Facebook group is very active. And so we heard about it that way. And then our travel arrangements, I think we flew into Boston and then took the train or the bus up to Portland. And so we got picked up first by the Camp Sunshine van, and then we went to pick up Jess and Felima and their family. And so I was actually in the van, and the volunteer who was driving us around, I saw this family of 5 with all these bags. And so I hopped out of the van and started helping the guy put the stuff in the van. And Jess and Felima actually thought I was a volunteer.
You had a yellow shirt on.
I did. I was wearing a yellow shirt, and they all wore yellow shirts.
All the volunteers wear yellow shirts at Camp Sunshine.
Yeah, well, I love the story. Thank you for sharing. I'm still thinking about supporting organizations, and I'm wondering, Toby, if there's any other organizations that come to mind.
So aside from the Schwachman-Diamond Syndrome Foundation and Camp Sunshine, 2 that have been important to Kavan have been Special Olympics and Team Impact. And both of those are things that he got a lot out of and enjoyed participating in. He still participates in Special Olympics. He does soccer and tennis primarily, and Angela gets involved with that and does some of the coaching or assistant coaching depending on what season it is and who else is signed up for stuff. But Kavan's really enjoyed that, and it's been good for him to be in that community where other people are dealing with things that are of medical complexity and just more aware of special needs. And then Team Impact is kind of the opposite of that, where they partner a special needs kid with a college athletic team. And so the impact comes from the one kid interacting with the one team. And so Kavan was able to be a part of the UCCS men's basketball team for several seasons. And he really got into it. He wasn't really a big basketball person before that, but being part of that team and around those guys, he totally just got really into the sport. That's actually how he did Team Impact before he did Special Olympics basketball. And so having that Team Impact experience helped him to move into the basketball part of Special Olympics.
Yeah, well, thanks for explaining. We'll be sure to include all these organizations in the show notes. The Schwachman-Diamond Syndrome Foundation, Camp Sunshine, Special Olympics, Team Impact. Was there another one you'd like to include, Jess?
Yeah, there's just one more, and it just really quick. I wanted to also say Make-A-Wish was also very, very impactful for my family. They gave all 3 of my kids a wish. Each had their own wish, and they gave them to them all over one summer in 2017. So it was just a great summer.
Okay. What were the wishes, just so we know?
So it started with Sadie, and her wish was to bake with Duff Goldman. He was great. He invited her to his house, and she cooked some cookies in his kitchen.
Okay.
And then let's see, Arianna wanted to swim with the dolphins in Hawaii. And so we went down to Hawaii and we swam with dolphins in Sea Life Shark. And then Ethan wanted to see Hamilton on Broadway. And so we went to New York and saw Hamilton.
Wow, 2017 must have been a special year, a year to remember.
And Kavan also.
Yep. That was also the year that Kavan's wish was granted. He had wished to meet the people that make his favorite video games, which at the time were Angry Birds and Boom Beach, made by Rovio and Supercell, which are both based in Finland. And so Kavan got a trip to Finland. So we spent a week in Finland, and he got to spend a day at each of the companies interacting with the game developers. Wow.
That is amazing.
Yeah.
So thanks for sharing. We'll definitely include Make-A-Wish in the show notes because everybody's situation is a little bit different. That sounds exciting, right? To be able to travel, not just the individual and a chaperone, but it's like a family experience, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I'm thinking about advice now. And Jess, I'll let you go first. Is there any advice that you can offer a dad who maybe is close to the beginning of his journey, raising a child or multiple children like yourself with special needs?
I think that the biggest thing that I tell anyone that gets into a situation similar to this, community is huge. Find a community. If it's people dealing with the same issue, like if it's another SDS family, then there are a lot of families out there that are dealing with SDS that you can talk to. But even if you can't find someone with the same syndrome, people going through similar circumstances, very important in helping you to kind of cope with the situation, so that you understand that you're not really alone in going through this. This isn't just you and just your family, just your kid, or even the experiences that the parents go through and dealing with insurance, for instance. It can be a huge headache, and you get those insurance headaches with any medical issue, not just the specific SDS.
Yeah, they're very liberal about distributing those insurance headaches to everybody.
Right.
You don't even have to have a child with special needs. You still get
them. Exactly. So, I mean, you get that, and then having to deal with specialist schedules, and you go through a lot of the same issues, even if it's not the same syndrome. And so find a community is the first thing that I tell people to do. There's a lot of value in it, and you really don't see the value until you are there and you experience it. The other thing that I found, and this is especially for families with kids with rare issues like this, you have to be an advocate for your kid. You have to understand the issue, the medical issues. We've been to the ER so many times, and we tell the doctor that whichever kid we're with at the ER, she has SDS, and they say, "What's that?" Schwachman-Diamond Syndrome. Well, what does that entail? It's neutropenia and pancreatic insufficiency. And well, what does that mean? I mean, what does that mean for this visit? Okay, so you're going to need to take a CBC, a blood culture. If the CBC comes back low here, then you're going to have to give a broad spectrum antibiotic, because she's so susceptible to sepsis that we have to hit as much possibility as we can here. And so you really have to stand up and not just accept what the doctors tell you necessarily. I mean, when the ER sent us home, I should have stood up more, and I should have told him, well, no, he's got sorry, with the story with Ethan, when they sent us home with the 104-degree temp that developed while we were there, I should have stood up and said, well, no, this happened while we were here, and 104 is a high temp. We can't go home with this. We have to figure this out and monitor him. Anyway, you have to learn from things like that and be heard.
The two things I heard you say were to find a community and then to be an advocate. And you inadvertently also emphasize the importance of patience. If you have to explain something to the medical professionals about your child, it seems counterintuitive, but let's face the facts. Some of this stuff is really specialized. And why would everybody who went through medical school know all these things, right?
Yeah.
So, I think that having, the grace or patience that goes along with, more about your child than anybody else. And then making sure that, you're on top of that, regardless of what the circumstances or the words you're hearing. That's what I heard you say. And Toby, I'm wondering if there's any advice that you can suggest up and above emphasizing what Jess did about finding a community and being an advocate.
Yep. So I agree with both of you about your points. I would say that one of the things that was important for me was doing my best to treat Kavan like a normal kid. I think that so much focus gets put on the special need that the normal needs are kind of overshadowed. And so it's important to, get the kid involved in youth soccer and put them out there for things that, a normal kid would do. for Kavan, he started out in rec league, and when that got too competitive and people started being not nice, we moved him over to Special Olympics. Mm-hmm. But I think that it was important for Kavan to be on that rec league first. And I think that he had a great time in rec league prior to the competitiveness of it. But even then, he was still excited to go. He just didn't enjoy it as much as he used to. So I would say that in addition to the community and the other stuff, just let them be a kid and, try to fit in as much normal kid stuff as you can amidst all of the doctor visits and medications and all of it. So,
yeah, well, thank you for making the point. The way I've heard it phrased is you want your kids to have as typical an experience as possible and not have the diagnosis be, what is sort of driving all their waking moments and all their experiences. So, really good point as well. So, let's give a special shout out to your parents, Jess, Arlene, and Roy, who I met on an Egyptian cruise in the fall of 2021 for helping connect us. It's not the first time that I've met somebody on vacation that says, oh, I have some experience with special needs. And, obviously this was their career, right? They were career special educators.
Right.
And it wasn't until after the trip we were communicating and I sent some information on the Special Fathers Network that he said, oh, we actually have some grandchildren with special needs. I'm like, oh, that would be great. I'm looking to interview more grandfathers. Roy, I'd like to interview you. He goes, no, I'm the wrong person. You really need to interview Jess. And don't overlook his close friend, Toby. So, Roy and Arlene, thank you for helping make this podcast possible.
And Roy, if you're listening, you should totally do an interview.
Thanks for the plug, Toby. So if somebody wants to learn about Schwachman-Diamond Syndrome or contact either of you, what's the best way to do that?
I'm going to say email.
Okay.
Yeah. Email absolutely is probably the best way to contact me.
Okay. I'll be sure to include both your emails in the show notes, as well as information on the Shwachman-Diamond Syndrome Foundation, as well as the Camp Sunshine, which obviously has played a really meaningful role in each of your lives, as well as Make-A-Wish and then Team Impact as well.
Mm-hmm.
So, Toby and Jess, thank you for taking the time and many insights. As a reminder, Toby and Jess are two dads who are part of the Special Fathers Network, a mentoring program for fathers raising a child with special needs. If you'd like to be a mentor father or are seeking advice from a mentor father with a similar situation to your own, please go to 21stcenturydads.org. Thank you for listening to the latest episode of the Special Fathers Network Dad to Dad podcast. I hope you enjoyed the conversation as much as I did. As you probably know, the 21st Century Dads Foundation is a 501c3 not-for-profit organization, which means we need your help to keep our content free to all concerned. Would you please consider making a tax-deductible donation? I would really appreciate your support. Toby and Jess, thanks again.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Thank you.
And thank you for listening to the Special Fathers Network Dad to Dad podcast. The Special Fathers Network is a dad-to-dad mentoring program for fathers raising children with special needs. Through our personalized matching process, new fathers with special needs children match up with mentor fathers in a similar situation. It's a great way for dads to support other dads. To find out more, go to 21stcenturydads.org.
And if you're a dad looking for help or would like to offer help, we would be honored to have you join our closed Facebook group. Please go to facebook.com/groups and search Dad to Dad. Lastly, we're always looking to share interesting stories. If you'd like to share your story or know of a compelling story, please send an email to david@21stcenturydads.org.
The Special Fathers Network Dad to Dad podcast was produced by me, Tom Couch. Thanks again to Horizon Therapeutics, who believe that science and compassion must work together to transform lives. That's why they work tirelessly to research, develop, and bring forward medicines for people living with rare and rheumatic diseases. Discover more about Horizon Therapeutics at horizontherapeutics.com.